Stephanie from WorkSafe Tasmania, and I'll be your moderator today. In recognition of the deep history and culture of this island, we acknowledge Tasmanian Aboriginal people, the original and continuing custodians of the land, sea and sky. We acknowledge and pay our respects to all Tasmanian Aboriginal people, all of whom have survived invasion, dispossession and continue to maintain their identity, culture and Aboriginal rights. Please now take a moment to read the following slide about information received today. Please use the chat tab to type any questions you have for today's presenter. Those questions will be answered at the end of the webinar. Only presenter webcams will be used, and today's presentation is also being recorded. It is now my pleasure to introduce your presenter, Dan Ball from By Mind Side. Dan spent 12 years working in IT, running himself into the ground and hiding anxiety from his co-workers. Feeling burnt out and anxious before meetings, Dan felt isolated. A single conversation with someone who understood could help, but finding that person was difficult. Now Dan and the By Mind Side team promote peer support and mental health programs in workplaces. Dan regularly speaks on mental health first aid, leads training sessions and urges leaders to support peer supporters' wellbeing. Since July 2021, Dan has been a mental health first aid instructor and is part of the Mental Health First Aid Instructor Reference Group. He's also studying psychology at Monash University, and we welcome Dan today.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Stephanie. Before I jump in, I just want to acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation that I dial in from, and also acknowledge the various traditional custodians of the lands in Tasmania and around the nation. Also want to acknowledge lived and living experience of mental illness, especially today on World Mental Health Day. If there's anyone on this webinar dialed in who's feeling struggles, feeling challenges at the moment, remember, you're not alone. And as you can see on my jumper, you are enough. I'm Dan Ball, and you'll have to forgive some of the humor that's laced through some of these slides. This is what we'll be peering into over this short presentation. So we've got about 25 minutes, and as Stephanie mentioned, some questions at the end. Who am I? Well, Stephanie mentioned a lover of technology and lover of data, and couple that with a passion for peer support, but safe peer support. So data can inform us on what safety and efficacy and peer support programs mean, but also allows us to look out for the support of themselves. So over the following slides, we'll be looking at what are peer support programs in workplaces? Why do workplaces have them? Some of the strengths and some of the challenges that we have seen in real life peer support programs. And we'll also look at some of the data behind those real world peer support programs as well. There's a final slide that's got some practical resources and some steps that we can take, depending on where we are in our workplaces in developing a peer support program, whether we're at the beginning, in the middle, or we're just trying to keep things ticking along. So that's what we'll be covering. Firstly, why do workplaces have peer support programs? In fact, what are they? So a peer support program would be where a workplace would train some of their employees to provide a listening ear, and they're not there to be a pseudo psychologist or a clinician at all, but to provide that listening ear to people maybe at an earlier sign of struggle. So it's often the case that we see peer supporters be accessed first, or peer supporters hearing about challenges first in the workplace, and to help reduce the kind of stigma around mental ill health in the workplace. There is some evidence to show that peer support programs can reduce occupational stress. A couple of evidence bases, which if anyone is interested in that those studies, I can share with them after this presentation. But recognizing that a lot of workplaces have a number of different resources, supports that can be sometimes pretty problematic for someone to find, especially if they're facing, they're struggling themselves. Sometimes we just don't know where to start. And peer supporters can help at that stage, guide people who are struggling to the right supports, and like I said, to the professionals as well. We've got a little bit of a case study down there as to why we've seen this, or how we've seen peer supporters be really effective in a workplace. And if we look at organizational change, and especially poor organizational change being flagged as a psychosocial hazard. So recognizing that peer supporters do often hear about those challenges before anyone else, we have seen an organization roll out a new rostering platform and organizational change with their rostering that's had a huge impact on like working hours and remuneration, which, as you can imagine, isn't particularly great in a cost of living crisis. As they rolled that out state by state, data has been able to show, okay, well, there's been a significant increase in peer support interactions after the first rollout in the first state, which has enabled the workplace health and safety team to then kind of reevaluate what does the rollout look like in future states and territories. That saved a lot of heartache. That data was then vital to minimizing the disruption in the future states and territories that they rolled out to. So there are benefits, but let's not kid ourselves. There are also challenges, there's risks, and a bit of an analogy for everyone here. I love camping, and I'm not especially that good at starting a campfire. It takes me a lot of time and effort to start a campfire, and if you ask my partner, probably too much time. But once it's started, it makes sense to keep it going. You know, we have to keep that fire going to avoid burning out. And if we relate that to a peer support program, we've seen a number of workplaces put so much investment, both from a time perspective, but that's a significant cost investment often, in training peer supporters, going through the whole expression of interest process, training them, and then expecting that the program will just continue. And that's not the case. And the training is just the start. And if there's not consistent support, not consistent wood being added to that fire, then we see some of those risks that we've got on the slide there. So are our peer supporters really recognizing what their boundaries are, or being able to maintain and enforce their boundaries? Are they equipped with the right skills to listen and to refer and guide the people that they're supporting with various different challenges that they're hearing? And what kind of workload are they taking on? You know, I say workload, but you know, peer supporters, they do this out of the kindness of their hearts in a volunteer role, in addition often to a full-time job. So that additional load can be a pretty heavy emotional toll, and also lead to an experience of secondary or vicarious trauma. So now we're going to look at what those insights, the data insights that I mentioned, look like. What are some of those challenging conversations, we call them interactions, that peer supporters are having? There's a lot going on in this slide, so I'll walk you through it. So we split the data here between emergency services and non-emergency services, because we're seeing, in some respects, different data points, different interaction types based upon emergency services and non-emergency services. This sample was a little over 1,200 real-life peer support interactions. So we don't capture any identifiable data, everything's confidential, but these themes and trends are really useful to help inform some of the initiatives that workplaces can put in place. If we're hearing a lot of a particular type of theme, then perhaps a workplace can put in some training and supports around that theme. But then if we look at what the peer supporters are seeing there, and you can see in a non-emergency services setting, pretty much 50%, close to 50% is all around work stress. And under the key points in the top right-hand corner, you can see what the subcategories are underneath work stress. So we've kind of coupled them into one definition, but the biggest contributors being co-workers, discrimination, harassment and bullying, organizational change, role change, and workload. So these are the people who are coming to a peer supporter and saying, hey, I'm struggling with this issue with my coworker, or I'm being impacted by bullying in the workplace. So then the peer supporter will be supporting that person and guiding them to further help if appropriate. So what this means as well is we have seen some organizations in the past just used, let's say, for instance, mental health first aid as the only piece of training in a peer support program. And you can see the light blue square or rectangle there. And mental health is accounting for roughly anywhere between kind of 15 and 20% of the interactions that peer supporters are having in this sample. So if we're only training up our peer supporters in mental health first aid, then there's a whole range of other challenges, other conversations that they might be having that perhaps they're not equipped for or they're not trained for. So we've got a couple of questions that we can ask ourselves if we're running peer support programs in our own workplaces. Are our peer supporters trained for some of the interactions that they're actually having? Should we be putting them on further training, like contact officer training, for example, so they have a better grasp of how to listen and support people who are experiencing harassment and bullying in the workplace? Are we aware of what impact some of these conversations are having on the peer supporter themselves? If I'm having 5 bereavement related interactions over the course of a month, well, that's bound to have an impact on me, a secondary impact on me. So a takeaway point, let's ask our peer supporters, ask ourselves, have we provided the right training to cover all the various facets of conversations and questions that they might be asked? It's not just the type of interaction, the theme of interaction, but also the duration, the volume of interactions that our peer supporters might be copying. And you've got a little bit of a poll coming up that's going to be launched. And a question for you all: what do you feel is the average duration of a peer support interaction? Let's wait a couple of more moments. We'll get a few more votes in. And I think we've still got a couple more coming in. We've got 72% of the audience that have responded, so I think that's a pretty good rate. We'll come to the answer, so a little bit of a drum roll. Look, this is definitely not just a water cooler conversation. Peer supporter is not just having a 5-10 minute chat here and there. It is, in fact, an average of 38 minutes. So for those 6 people who guessed the 38 minutes, well done. So the average peer support interaction being 38 minutes. And you can see for some of them there, critical incident stress, co-worker, bullying, discrimination, and harassment is a little bit over that average. And 24% of interactions actually exceeding 1 hour in this sample set that we've seen. In organizations that do operate a typical 9 to 5, 8% of them, 8% of the peer support interactions are after 5 p.m. So these are the kind of questions that we can ask ourselves and also put in our expressions of interest, our communications that go out to potential new peer supporters. Hey, are you aware of some of the commitment that might come up? Are you aware that it's not just a 5-10 minute conversation here and there? Yeah, an average might be something like 38 minutes. And you can see at the bottom of that slide there, yes, yeah, the highest is probably a bit of an outlier, 12 interactions for a peer supporter in a month, but that's like over 8 hours of interactions. It's probably more closer to that average that we can see there. That sometimes, if we say to a peer supporter or a potential peer supporter, hey, what are your expectations of how much time you might be spending in this role? It's fair to say that some answers come back as, I reckon it was going to be a 15, 20, 30 minute commitment each month. It's not. So we do need to factor that in, make sure that the expectations are set, but also because this is such a load to take on sometimes, the peer supporters are doing this at the kindness of their hearts. How can we recognize them for all of the wonderful stuff that they're doing? They don't do it for recognition. The sheer nature of a peer supporter is not to do this for recognition, but a pat on the back really does go a long way. One of the questions we ask is, how confident were you in this interaction? So we asked the peer supporter that, how confident were you in this interaction? And over those slightly over 1,200 interactions, you can see a vast difference in 2 different types of program. So there's the one program that has done the initial training, perhaps. It might be the 2-5-day peer support training. There's not one set standard for peer support training, but a number of EAPs do somewhere between that 2 and 5 days. And for those organizations that just have gone through the training and don't have a regular support structure throughout, we can see a confidence there, an average confidence rating from that sample of 6.6 out of 10. But when the program is supported by a designated peer support coordinator, there's that regular ongoing reflective practice, perhaps as a group. So the group not mentioning any names or breaching confidentiality at all, but hey, I had this interaction, I said this, I'd love to get feedback. What would you have done in this type of environment or in this conversation? And that's really powerful. And that could be with a clinician. It should be with a clinician, maybe someone from the organization's employee assistance provider, maybe monthly, if not quarterly, providing that regular structure to support peer supporters. As you can see, it's a significant difference, 6.6 versus 8.8. Without a peer support coordinator and that regular support, 6.6, with 8.8. We also asked the question, have you supported this person before? And the reason we do this, again, we can't capture any identifiable information, but we do want to look out for, are our peer supporters becoming overly relied on? Are they seeing what we would call as repeat interactions? Because the sheer nature of peer support, as we mentioned a little bit earlier, we should be referring on. You know, might listen in that first interaction, but we are not the professionals as peer supporters. We're there to refer on when that person or that person to the EAP or other professional support. In the first 3 months of a new program, the data analysis of a new program, we see the answer to that question, have you supported this person before? There's 3 choices: no, yes for a different reason, and yes for the same reason, that being the repeat interaction. We see the answer yes for the same reason 1 in 2 times, so 50% of the interactions. Now that's kind of a flag to us to then flag to the organization, hey, perhaps it's worthwhile a supervision session on how to maintain, enforce boundaries, because yeah, people get kind of reliant on peer supporters. They might keep on going back and back as they feel more comfortable, but what load is that posing to the peer supporter? So there's a risk there. There is a risk of that over-reliance. Once we've identified that after the first couple of months and an organization has had that supervision session, or they've had conversations with their peer supporters to help maintain and enforce those boundaries, we do see that yes for the same reason reduce. And you can see on the right-hand side pie chart there, that becomes 30%. So it still might be a little bit higher than what we'd hope it to be, but at least it's not 50%. And this couples with the following slide, and I've got a couple more to go before we get into questions. Peer support programs should likely lead to an increase in EAP usage. So we do ask a question to the peer supporters, what was the outcome of this interaction? In those first 3 months, we do see a much higher rate of the response. It was just listening only. And then after a few months, the peer supporters get more confident, comfortable enforcing boundaries. And you can see the referred to EAP as an outcome increase following those first few months. So never should a peer support program be the equivalent or an alternative to an EAP program. It's obviously there to complement it, and we should see that increase over time. And it's really interesting to see some of the data correlation between what's the EAP hearing and what's the peer support, what are our peer supporters seeing. So a couple of questions we can ask ourselves there. Are our peer supporters confident in identifying the boundaries of their role? Are there clear guidelines on how and when to refer to an EAP? And do we provide enough supervision and reflective practice for our peer supporters? We've got important points to take away there. So just to summarize what we've spoken about, peer supporters do often hear those challenges before anyone else, and that is a really effective, often really effective early intervention tool, but as one part of an overall mental health and well-being strategy in the workplace. But again, let's not kid ourselves. There are risks. There are risks in the type of conversation, the amount of conversation. So these are things that we need to be bear in mind. And just having that continuous support is absolutely fundamental. That continuous support of the coordinator, training, supervision, and of course to help enforce those boundaries. I'm going to wrap it up there. We've got a bunch of free resources that are useful at any stage of a peer support program. So we do have a guide on our website that people can scan the QR code. Hopefully it's coming through big enough. But if any of those resonate with you, like an implementation checklist, expression of interest trackers, so recruitment and training trackers, and supervision, agenda templates, schedule templates. We've even mapped what peer support means for psychosocial codes of practice, that being how can our peer supporters help us meet codes of practice, but also what are the risks of peer support in relation to the codes of practice. So feel free to drop me an email if anyone needs or wants any of those resources. We don't have them on our website yet, but we're going to over the next month or so. And with that, I want to say thank you so much and open it up to any questions.
Okay, so thank you to our presenter today, Dan Ball from By Mind Side, for his webinar, Supporting the Supporter in Workplace Peer Support Programs. So if anyone does have any questions for Dan, please use the chat to send those questions through. And just a reminder as well that today's webinar has been recorded, so please head to WorkSafe Tasmania's YouTube channel to review, share this presentation, and also to see other webinars that we have run during WorkSafe month. A few acknowledgements of thank you, Dan.
Thank you, everyone.
So I'll now begin to wrap up today's webinar. So thank you again to our presenter, Dan Ball from By Mind Side, for his webinar, Supporting the Supporter in Workplace Peer Support Programs. Today's webinar has been part of WorkSafe Tasmania Month. But before I continue, Dan, I'll let you answer a question that has come through. Are there some industries who do peer support well?
Yes, I'm going to say yes is a short answer in terms of fire and emergency services, ambulance. There are some mining organizations that do it well. So I guess we need to kind of spotlight on the organization rather than the industry. But if we're going to blanket an industry, definitely a good place to start is the ambulance and fire and emergency services.
All right, thanks, Dan. I'll just wait a few more moments before I continue. So with no further questions or comments coming through, again, thank you to our presenter today, Dan Ball from By Mind Side. Again, please head to WorkSafe Tasmania's website to see what other webinars we do have running during WorkSafe Tasmania Month, which runs throughout the month of October. WorkSafe Month is an initiative that is funded by the WorkCover Board Tasmania. So thank you again to our presenter. Thank you for everyone for attending, and please have a safe and healthy rest of the working day.
Thanks, everyone.